Twitch drops start today for Marvel Snap at 10 a.m. Central and run through the end of the year. Be sure to drop by twitch.tv/Jeff Hoagland to collect your free goodies while checking out some of my excellent Marvel Snap content live. It's OTA day, and today's got a lot of fantastic stuff in it. We've got changes to 9 different cards that include nerfs to current format powerhouses, as well as adjustments that are aimed to get out ahead of potential issues that could be created with new releases later this month, and then a number of small buffs to underplayed cards that will hopefully make them more useful. Let's get into it. Our first card change today is one that I've been clamoring for and I'm very happy to see. Professor X is going from a 5/3 down to a 5/1. Secondary notes that Professor X decks have been particularly effective at preying on metagames in Flux, or especially during certain feature locations, and they would much rather people explore and enjoy the excitement that these moments can bring instead of generating the toxic bullshit that Professor X generates. I might be paraphrasing that second part a bit, but I bet if they could write that down, they probably would. Secondary also notes something inside of the Professor X segment that I'm very happy to see, which is cards like Xavier that aggressively restrict players' ability to play to the board are a dynamic that they carefully want to control inside the game of Marvel Snap. Our second nerf this week is to another format powerhouse. Werewolf by Night is going from a 3/3 that jumps around the board as you play on reveal effects growing larger to the same text box, but now a 4/4. Second Order starts off the Werewolf by Night section by noting that Werewolf offers a few different decks an early source of pressure that's hard to compete with. Not only is it hard to compete with because it scales up very large very quickly, but it's also difficult to compete with because the way Werewolf ping-pongs around the board allows a good Marvel Snap player to duck commonly played tech cards like Shang-Chi and Shadow King that are typically used to keep up with large stat sticks. Second Editor goes on to say that they considered a number of changes to Werewolf, but ultimately they enjoyed the excitement of the card jumping around the board and wanted to maintain that, so they're pushing it up the curve to a 4 cost. Well, there's no doubt about it that a 4 energy Werewolf is definitely weaker than the previous 3 energy variation. I would be kind of surprised if Werewolf by Night doesn't remain playable. The baseline for a 4 energy stat stick in Marvel Snap to be good is typically getting into the double digits worth of power, which Werewolf by Night will still be able to do with just 3 unrevealed cards played on turns 5 and 6. I think the biggest shift that I expect as a result of this Werewolf change is that specifically the Sentry plus Annihilus decks that have previously been playing Werewolf by Night as an additional stat stick will have to look elsewhere for that. Not playing Werewolf by Night until turn 4 means that you would have to Sentry on 5 and then Annihilus on 6, which is ultimately a little too slow for those decks in a lot of situations, I think. Our next change this week is not what I'm going to strictly call a nerf per se. It's definitely more of a side grade. Black Widow is going from a 2/1 with the on reveal of giving your opponents a Widow's Bite to a 3/3. Second Editor notes that shifting Widow's Bite to a 0-1 was an effective boost overall to Black Widow's strength. That being said, they're less happy with how easy and rewarding it is to play Widow out multiple times, either with something like Beast or with locations that allow you to easily copy her. Second Editor notes that they view this change as a way to make Widow a little bit more consistent, making her worst case scenario be a bit better by letting her provide more base stats, but simultaneously it lowers her ceiling by making it more difficult to trigger her multiple times over the course of a game. Our next change this week is another lateral one. Viper is going from a 2/3 up to a 3/4 while retaining her same on reveal text box. Secondary notes that the primary driving factor in this lateral change is an abundance of caution around the recently released card Havoc. They had tested turn 3/4 Havoc alongside Viper, and in their testing, it didn't impress. That being said, there are a number of variables that are different in today's live environment than when they tested that with Havoc, and this type of effect, even if it's not overbearing and too powerful, tends to create kind of frustrating play patterns that they kind of want to make sure aren't at the forefront of what Marvel Snap is. In addition to the things that we just talked about for the Viper and Black Widow change in the current metagame, both of these adjustments also potentially get out ahead a little bit of our upcoming card release Selene. Specifically, Selene with Black Widow I think is still going to be incredibly powerful, i.e. you play Black Widow and then Selene one after another on the same turn, and then Celine makes that Widow's Bite a -4 power card that your opponent's going to feel obligated to deploy so they can continue drawing cards. Previously, you're going to be able to do that on the third turn of the game with a 2 energy Widow, and now that that's going to be pushed up the curve to turn 4, while I think it will still be powerful, it'll be a bit less so. We had a couple of nerfs, we had a couple of lateral changes. Finally, let's close up with the most exciting part of any over there update, the buffs. To start, we have a couple of small power updates, starting with a couple of cards that were released a little bit on the weak side, which is Martyr going from a 1/4 to a 1/5, and Gladiator going from a 3/7 up to a 3/8. We also have an additional point of power being added to a Series 1 card, the Punisher, going from a 3/2 up to a 3/3. Will any of these buffs make these cards relevant in the metagame? Maybe. Gladiator and Martyr were both cards that felt like they were very close before, and they're definitely strictly better than they were. Punisher potentially gets up to a 3/7 under the right conditions. That being said, that's a condition that you don't strictly control, your opponent does, so 3/5 or 3/6 seems more realistic. I'd be more surprised if that one is relevant compared to the other two. Finally, we have a pair of buffs that go hand in hand. Ronan the Accuser is going from a 5/3 with the ongoing getting +2 for each card in your opponent's hand to a 5/5 with that same effect. And Maximus is going from a 3/7 with the on reveal your opponent draws 2 cards to a 2/6 with this same effect. Second Editor notes that Ronan's been on their buff list for a while, and they even considered a more extensive rework. That being said, in the short term, they're going with just bumping up the power that it brings to the table to see how that works out. Maximus is a card that kind of has a couple of implications from it. The first is that it is an upgrade to Ronan, so this is 2 buffs in 1 for that card. And as far as metagame considerations go, Maximus being a more widely playable card is an indirect nerf to recently released Powerhouse Blob, since if you play this out to fill your opponent's hand up before that blob triggers, your opponent's deck is smaller and likely the blob is as well. This energy change to Maximus means a couple of things in the context of Ronin the Accuser shells. It means that you can play 2 additional 2-drops out, i.e. you could play Maximus, Master Mold, and something like Shadow King out on turn 6, buffing your stat stick an incredible amount while also disrupting what your opponent has in play. It also means you can play Maximus along with a more powerful tech card like Shang-Chi or Enchantress, doing much of the same but in a little bit different manner. I think this Maximus change likely has implications outside of Ronin shells as well. While we're obviously pretty far removed from Marvel Snap's closed beta a year and a half ago at this point, when Hellcow was a 2/6 at that time, it was quite potent in decks just looking to play efficient stats on the final turn of the game, especially ones that line up with tech cards like Shang-Chi and Enchantress. Honestly, I kind of feel like they knocked this over their update out of the park. They knocked down Professor X, one of my personally least favorite cards. They pulled Werewolf by Night back in a way that seems like it's pretty reasonable. They tried to get out ahead of potential future problems by adjusting Black Widow and Viper before Celine drops. They gave small buffs to underperforming cards that are recently released like Martyr and Gladiator, and they gave us 2 brand new toys essentially that everybody has access to in Ronin plus Maximus. As always, if you enjoyed my breakdown on this topic, be sure to snap that like button and make sure you subscribe to the channel. You made it all the way to this end of the video, so you probably enjoyed some of what I had to say. Be sure to check back in again here on YouTube tomorrow for a fresh deck highlight trying out some of these card changes, or if you're inclined to watch it live, remember Twitch drops are going on right now, so head on over to twitch.tv/Jeff Hoagland, where I'm probably brewing like a madman with these cards as I speak.